Welcome back to Bold Assumptions, Article Roundup. This week we're talking global warming. The first article was from NBC News and it's titled Carbon Dioxide Hits a Level Not Seen for 3 Million Years. And at heart, the article is just that. Further on in the article, it talks about how trees actually spread all the way up to the Arctic during the time when the CO2 levels were that high because the earth was so warm that vegetation was able to grow that far. And that's honestly scary because on top of that, the sea levels were so high, if you think about it, that could be New York City underwater. Rooting back to the topic of CO2, the thing about it is the molecules of CO2, as sunlight comes through the atmosphere, they kind of trap and capture the heat, and that's why the Earth kind of microwaves in a sense when there's so much CO2. And according to the article, we've hit about 415 parts per million of CO2, which may not seem like a lot, but normal levels are around 280, and during the Ice Age, it was around 200. So you can put that into perspective how high ppm we have right now. Not to mention, the article also states that the parts per million of CO2 is expected to increase to about 500 within the next 30 years. And the thing about that is that means that temperatures would go up about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And that might not seem like a lot, but for these organisms which rely so heavily on the equilibrium threat right now, that could mean devastating things. The thing a lot of people never tend to factor in is just how delicate life really is. Even just in general, for us to be here right now, our Earth itself, there's very few margins of error for where we can be. And even with temperature, you have to be within a certain threshold to even exist. So for us to move 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit in average temperatures, that's actually a lot more than it sounds like. And what a lot of people don't realize is as the Earth gets hotter, it only starts off a chain reaction of, it's almost like exponential growth in that rate, because when the permafrost starts melting, all the CO2 trapped underneath there starts releasing in the atmosphere too, and it just creates a chain reaction of getting hotter and hotter. This is why many scientists say we're nearing the point of no return, because eventually it's going to get to the point where it's so hot that it just keeps cycling, repeating itself, melting more ice and releasing more CO2. It'll get to the point where we literally just can't reverse it and got to deal with the effects. The article ends with a statement that this 415 parts per million of CO2, we're not going to see the effects of all that damage today. He said the researcher of the article said it's going to take upwards of 30 generations or 1,000 years of people before anything really sets in. So our descendants, in a way, are going to have to pay for the choices we made today, which I know a lot of people are kind of like, oh, it's not going to affect my lifetime, but you got to think about the longevity of the Earth in this case. Moving on to the next article by Daily Mail, it kind of relates to the last article and the effect of global warming as a whole. It's titled The World's First Floating Nation Set to Appear Around 2020. So essentially a quick rundown of what's going on with this floating nation is the fact that the owner of PayPal set to create this floating nation by the year 2020, and he's doing it because he doesn't like the way the government's going right now, and he also doesn't like the way that global warming's heading. His plan is to crowdsource enough money to basically fund this new civilization, and I'm assuming because it's in the middle of the water, it's international, there's no really government body owning you, so he can kind of make his own rules and have his own little utopia in a way. And then they also want to be self-sustaining because they don't want the effects of global warming to kind of take them over. They want to be floating, so when sea levels rise, they rise too. They won't get overthrown by the ocean or whatever. And they also want to be able to grow their own food, make their own energy, drink their own self-clean water and all that stuff. He also claims that by 2050 he wants to have thousands of these floating cities. And the cool thing about these cities is because they're floating and the way they hope to design them, basically you can expand so easily just by adding another floating building to the group. It's basically like Legos in a sense, and you're just connecting them together in the middle of the ocean. And honestly, I like this idea because in the midst of all the people wanting to go to space or go to Mars and live on all these different planets, you got to realize our planet right here, we have so much untamed wilderness in a sense. Like the ocean, if we were to make giant pontoons and different types of civilizations in the ocean, that's so much land left for humanity. And it's also the fact that even if the effects of global warming set in, you have these hopefully self-sustaining cities that will just be in the middle of the ocean. So you have so much land left to conquer. Not really land, but potential land. Not to mention, on top of that, it would be way cheaper than sending people to space or the moon or anything like that, because obviously it's going to cost hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to go to the moon and all that. But right here on Earth, you can build a self-sustaining city for, as they estimate, as low as $60 million. Another cool thing about this city is they hope to run it like a real city. They're going to have, office buildings, hotels, all types of different, restaurants and business. And I'm assuming they're going to import the goods from ships from mainland, but either way, it's just a really good idea. Going back to his idea on the fact that he wants to liberate humanity from its politicians, as he claimed. I kind of see where he's coming from, because what he's basically saying is that our politicians are too set in the old ways, and they don't really want to be progressive and, invest in all these self-sustaining technologies. And so his idea is, by making his own nation, he could do just that, and he can run it in a very clean way. And he really just wants to be more futuristic, and he doesn't want to be so set in his ways. He just wants to move with the times in a way. The talks of this floating city really drives the question as to whether it might be more viable to go into Mars, because, as I was talking about earlier with the cost, I'm almost wondering, maybe moving forward, rather than, these big dreams of going to Mars, which are making headlines, we need to start focusing on the ocean, because, it's nearly 3/4 of our whole planet. We have so much more room for expansion on our planet, rather than just, going to a whole different planet, taking hundreds of years before anything really happens. Anyways, it's been Bold Assumptions. Thanks for watching.